Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, that is Sahitya Abhyasa Academy. Today I am going to give a class on Thomas Love Peacock's The Critical work essay, that is the four ages of poetry. As we have studied in my previous classes how the Plato shows his disagreement towards about poets and poetry, like we can see here Thomas Love Peacock also showing his disrespect more than he's making fun on the poetry, the formation of that poetry, the creation of that poetry. He's joking on that created kind of a poetry. So this is how we see many more poets try to show their disagreement towards to the poetry. So poetry is not a noble thing to write such a form of a literature like. So here we can see the Thomas Love Peacock, the close friend of P.B. Shelley. Yes, P.B. Shelley is the close friend of Thomas Love Peacock. And there is one critical work of P.B. Shelley's defense of poetry. For knowing this work, you need to study Thomas Love Peacock's The Four Ages of Poetry, because it is the response of towards to this critical work. Let's begin. Who is Thomas Love Peacock? He is nothing but as a satirist, novelist, novelist, essayist, and he has written so many poems, among them Nightmare, Abhay, and Headlong, Headlong, Hall. The famous essays, The Four Ages of Poetry. So this is what his poems, and he's a close friend of Shelley. So he made so much fun on poetry. After listening the words from him, Love Peacock, Shelley has written the response of his words, that is a defense of poetry. Let's begin. What are the things he has told in his work, critical work? Before that, the four ages of poetry is a satirical. It is a satirical. Satire means making kindle on the things. Kindle, fun, humorous way, that is satire, and by Thomas Love Peacock, published in 1820. Yes, that examines the history and societal role of poetry. Here he just explained the poetry things from early days to modern era, how it is, how the poetry formation has written during the old ages to from the modern age. So he made the each age, and each age he gave its own name. Shall see what are that. And Peacock argues that poetry is a product of primitive society. Poetry is the product of primitive society, means it is a early kind of a society's explanation we can see in this poetry. Yes, like before the developing of a term called poetry, we can see the earliness of pictures in that poetry, that is primitive societies, ಮೊದಲಿನ ಕಾಲಿನ ಒಂದು ಸಮಾಜ. And that as civilization progress and become a more complex, see, in the beginning of the primitive age, we see the creation of poetry. That creation of poetry's formation has been again changed, and it is almost we see the civilization progress that make more complex. As we can see such things in the reflection of in his work, especially on poetry. In his matlab means it is reflection of in a poetry. The intellectual functions of poetry are superseded by philosophy, science, and other more rational pursuits. So see, this is how we have seen the changes has been taken over writing the poetry in a primitive state. How it is written means how it was written. After that, the civilization progress, how it has written. After that, we'll see the intellectual entry of philosophy and science and other more rational pursuit. What kind of poetry it has written? Means each era, each ages, we can see so many differences while writing in a poetry. What he conclude overall, these are the things shall see. He suggests that an age of brass or industrialized society, poetry is just a regressive force. Force means it is just like a moving backward. See, if we study about the science things, we see that day by day so many things are inventing. Yes, we see so many things are busy to show the inventions towards to the world. What about poetry? It is moving to the backward. This is what a kind of a fun making on poetry by Thomas Peacock. Thomas Love Peacock. See, name also contains Love Peacock. Nice. And next, so it is overall his words is that it is a plaything of childhood. In the beginning of the early era called primitive era, the creation of poetry till to the 21st century. The creation of poetry plays the role of childhood only. See, again he made a fun on a poetry. So that has no place in the mature intellectual landscape. However you read the poetry, you won't get any kind of a intellectual things because there is no any place for maturity, intellectual things in that particular work called a poetry, a poems. So this is how he made a so much fun on poetry. So here we see the four ages of poetry. Thomas Love Peacock doesn't actually say what kind of poetry should be written. So let me tell you, he didn't give any kind of his own word like Aristotle gave the things on poetry, and how Plato also gave the things on poetry, how it should be written like, whereas Sir Philip Sidney also given its also has given its own words what kind of poetry is created. But here this fellow called Thomas Love Peacock, he didn't give his own opinion about the creation of poetry. Instead that he spent the whole essay mocking poetry. He is very busy to show his humorous words on poetry. Such a primitive, expressing the primitive kind of a themes. There is no any includes the growth kind of a knowledge. There is no any include the intellectual things in there. It is only studying, it only studies to the backward kind of a poetry, backward kind of a society only. So it doesn't have any great things to make discussion in the society. It is only just like a child playful thing. So this is how he's mocking on poetry in front of Shelley. Though also he's a close friend of Shelley, he made so much fun on poetry. He's a romantic poet, yes, known as a one of a greatest poet in second generation. First generation, William Wordsworth, S.T. Coleridge, Scott. Whereas second generation, P.B. Shelley, Keats, Byron. In romantic age, okay, romantic age ದಲ್ಲಿ two generations, old generation and young generation ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬೋದು. Why they called as a young generation means within very young age all are died. young age ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಡೈಡ್ ಆಗಿರ್ತಾರೆ. ಆನ್ ದಟ್ ರೀಸನ್ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಯಂಗ್ ಜನ್ರೇಷನ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬೋದು. ಸೊ ಅದೇ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಸೊ he is very he shows so much devotion towards writing a poetry. Who? That is Shelley. He makes so much fun on the word called poetry. So he felt a kind of angry or disrespect how he has given on poetry. I need to give a backwards about this poetry. I need to secure. I need to defend about this poetry by taking the words, I should respond this poetry. This is how we can see in the further class about a defense of poetry by Shelley. Fine. So this is how moving on poetry, and what happens next? Treating is a outdated, means treating is, it is like a outdated, old fashioned, old fashioned kind of a form of literature. There is no any kind of a growth, invention, yes, can be seen in the form of called poetry. So largely useless in the modern age of science. If we study about the science, reason and political economy, the poetry will be stay as a last part, like a useless part in a literature. So it's highly showing so much humorous on that thing, working so much on poetry. I only get so much laughing on this thing. See, what I'm telling to the means, if a person who is very passionate to do something, the something is called sometimes like a entertain to the society. If someone make fun on that means a kind of a uh, kind of a disrespect we are feeling after listening that one. ಯಾರಾದರೂ sorry, I'm getting so much laughing on this word useless. See how he utilized the word called poetry, that is useless in front of Shelley, that is to Shelley. Sorry. Fine. ಸೊ ಏಜ್ ಆಫ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ರೀಸನ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಪೊಲಿಟಿಕಲ್, ಈ ಒಂದು ವಿಷಯಗಳ ಹತ್ರ ಬಂದಿದೆ ಅಂದರೆ ಪೋಯಿಟ್ರಿ ಯಾವುದೇ ಥರದ ಒಂದು ಸ್ಟೇಟಸ್ ತಗೊಳ್ಳೋದು. ಸಾರಿ,